I do not pretend in giving you the history of this royal slave to entertain my reader with the adventures of a feigned hero, whose life and fortune's fancy may manage at the poet's pleasure, nor in relating the truth designed to adorn it with any accidents, but such as arrived in earnest to him. And it shall come simply into the world, recommended by its own proper merits and natural intrigues, there being enough of reality to support it, and to render it diverting without the addition of intervention. Hi, my name is Nuria Menold, and this is my video essay as a final project for English 625, 18th century women's literature. For my final project, I decided to cover white saviorism, Oroonoko, and the blind side. For this project, I decided to study Oroonoko, or The Royal Slave by Aphra Behn. This novel was written in 1688, and it is told from the perspective of a white female narrator, likely thought to be Aphra Behn herself. However, for the sake of this video essay, I will just be referring to her as the narrator. The narrator has taken on the task of transcribing the life of the African prince Oroonoko. In this video essay, I will be analyzing the role of the narrator in Oroonoko and her relationship to the prince, how she removes herself from the narrative when she becomes uncomfortable, focusing on white comfort found in media, and the savior complex of the narrator that exists in modern media today, and the specific example I will use will be the blind side. Now, the narrator of Oroonoko sets herself up to be a benevolent character with no political power, only the power of the pen, which she will use to chronicle the life and death of the main protagonist, Prince Oroonoko. As she is introducing herself, she makes herself a trustworthy character by saying that she is an eyewitness. This gives her power over the narrative. On page 75, she says, "I was myself an eyewitness to a great part of what you will from here set down, and what I could not be witness of, I received from the mouth of the chief actor in this history, the hero himself, who gave us the whole transaction of his youth. Her kindness and graciousness make her a righteous person. She now has the moral high ground, and she can be praised for her work. In branding white saviorism, the ethics and irony of humanitarian discourse on Instagram, Elizabeth S. Cooney-Petro writes, showing compassion and empathy while ignoring the structural obstacles that people of color and people in the global south face is fundamental to white saviorism. Once the narrator has established herself as a force for good in the novel, she must identify who is evil. This can't be Oroonoko because he is royalty, and in Aphra Behn's eyes and the narrator's, royalty cannot really do wrong, especially if it's righteous royalty or the royalty she supports. So this cannot be Oroonoko. So she decides to put this evil on the banister and the man who executed Oroonoko in the final pages of this novel. 1 quarter was sent to Colonel Martin, who refused it and swore he had rather see the quarters of the banister and the governor himself than those of Caesar, on page 140. The narrator becomes a white savior because she preserves the story of Oroonoko and places herself in a position of where she can observe, but she cannot help the prince. As a good white person, she can judge the actions of the evil. Meanwhile, she is on a plantation, and she is part of the community of suppressors that brought Oroonoko to Suriname to live as a slave. She is ignoring her role while admiring Oroonoko's courage. Slavery and everything it entails is an ugly and disgusting business, and as a woman, the narrator often leaves when events become too much. This is a privilege that the other women, such as Imiona and the other enslaved woman, are incapable of. When Oroonoko is dying after his attempted suicide, the narrator is overwhelmed. On page 139, she says, "His discourse was sad, and the earthly smell about him so strong that I was persuaded to leave the place for some time, being myself but sickly and very apt to fall into fits of dangerous illness upon extraordinary melancholy." Seeing her comfort and her health become more important than Oroonoko's, she's leaving when she herself becomes uncomfortable. Not only does the narrator seek physical comfort, but she also needs mental and emotional comfort. However, she cannot have this when she's witness to Oroonoko's pain, but unable to be his savior. She can't save him in these scenarios. She has no real political power. Above all, though, she must be righteous, in Oroonoko's eyes and the eyes of the audience. On page 132 to 133, after Oroonoko has been whipped. She says, "We said all things to him that trouble, pity, and good nature could suggest, protesting our innocence of the fact and our abhorrence of such cruelties, making 1,000 professions of services to him, and begging as many pardons for the offenders, till we said so much that he believed we had no hand in his ill treatment." The narrator takes on Oroonoko's suffering when she is present to convince him that she would never harm him. She's entreating him. She's saying, "We would never do this to you." However, she's not even willing to be there and witness his pain, to experience it herself in a way. Elizabeth S. Cooney-Petro observes how photography has changed and how it has affected how the suffering of the other is seen. She says, "One shift is seen in how framing the images evolved, from the viewers and photographers both being outside the frame to moving inside the frame and in front of the camera. This changed the way suffering was represented, formerly by viewing to other, to now experiencing suffering with the other." On page 14. So for the sake of this video essay, I would just like for a moment to imagine that the settings and the novel are, in a way, a picture. And when the narrator is in the frame with Oroonoko or sharing a setting with him, she is in some ways experiencing his pain. She's taking on that role. When Oroonoko is dying towards the end of the novel, she has to leave the frame, however, because experiencing that shared pain becomes too much for her. So when she is out of frame, Oroonoko is again the center of attention for the audience, and he is alone in his pain, and his suffering is then put on display to spark sympathy or pity, Cooney-Petro writes on page 15. For the narrator to become a savior, there must be someone for her to save. However, Oroonoko is so highly praised in her eyes. She says, "A braver man, both for greatness of courage and mind, a judgment more solid, a wit more quick, and a conversation more sweet and diverting," on page 80. So she praises him highly. And it becomes clear that he cannot be something weak that she saves, but instead he comes to represent an other. He is not like the rest of his race in her eyes. He is unique, and that means he can be praised and protected. This trope is seen constantly throughout modern media, and the example I will focus on for this essay is The Blind Side. The Blind Side is an American movie that tells the story of Michael O'Hare, played by Quentin Aaron. In the film, O'Hare is adopted by a white family in Memphis, Tennessee, and it is an inspiring football movie about a rags to riches narrative, pretty common. However, the movie is not told from the perspective of O'Hare. It is told from the perspective of Lee Ann Tahoe, played by Sandra Bullock. In the voiceover, she is the first voice you hear at the beginning of the movie. And it's through her eyes and the eyes of her family that we see O'Hare's story. In the white cinematic lens, decoding messages in The Blind Side, Sarah Lee Santillanes and Charisse Pimentel write, "From our analysis on character voice, we find that The Blind Side reinforces race relations whereby white people speak on the behalf of black people, a historically racial practice whereby knowledge produced by whites circumvents knowledge produced by blacks, which undermines blacks' perspectives and agency." Just like in Oroonoko, O'Hare's story is being told by a white woman and for a primarily white audience. This movie also gives a modern example of the other. In The Blind Side, O'Hare is portrayed as a passive, dumbed-down child who is wandering aimlessly through life, Santillanes and Charisse. His character is the complete opposite of the rest of the black community, and Oroonoko receives the same treatment from the narrator. Both of these black men are admired and accepted, but only because they appear less black. He had nothing of barbarity in his nature, but in all points addressed himself as if his education had been in some European court. Behn, page 80. Oroonoko's gentlemanlike nature is superior because it is considered an attribute of white men, further enforcing white superiority. Santillanes and Charisse describe this as it appears in The Blind Side. They write, "In essence, whites can identify with and even come to adore exceptional black and brown individuals because those exceptional individuals have successfully transcended their blackness or brownness." From the 17th to the 21st century, white superiority, white saviors, and anti-black narratives have been pervasive in popular media. The narrator, in Oroonoko, reinforces white superiority by praising Oroonoko for his beauty, but only because it's perceived whiteness. His nose was rising and Roman instead of African and flat. The narrator has a sense of being a savior because she becomes a witness and the only person deemed capable or willing to preserve the prince's story. The Blind Side is a modern example of these same themes. Despite the feel-good attitude of the movie, it reinforces white superiority ideas and white saviorism. The novel Oroonoko should be studied to see how whiteness has persisted and changed to become more palatable for modern audiences. That is the end of my video essay. Thank you for watching.